Well, welcome back. We are in Ohio and you are getting night driving scenes while I talk to you about vehicle selection. So, vehicle selection. There are a couple of things I want to talk about, mainly from my experience as a salesperson over the last decade or more, and I wanted to pass some stuff along. So, number one, when you're going to a dealership to buy a car, this is very broad-based. This does not just pertain to Volkswagen, but and so you can take this with you wherever you go. Of course, you should be buying a Volkswagen because it's the best one out there. However, I may be a little bit biased. Okay, let's get started. So, the first thing you want to do before you go into the dealership is you want to figure out a couple of things. Number one, figure out what you like about your current car that you want in your next vehicle, and think about what you dislike about your current car that you do not want in your next vehicle. So sit down and try to make a list of those things. They're kind of like a pro and con list. You can make left and right sides of the page. The second thing you want to do is you want to figure out what is important to you in your next new vehicle, and that could be performance, that could be safety, that could be features, but define what that means to you. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes a person will come into the dealership and they'll say, and I'll ask them what is important to them in their next car, and this person might say performance. Well, it's important to know what performance means to them. So you may not have as intuitive a salesperson, so you want to make sure that you tell them what that means to you, because to me, performance means handling, brakes, suspension. For some other people, performance could mean the way the seats resist stains. Now, granted, you may not have that same perception, but understand that I've seen this a lot in the showroom. And a lot of people have a very different perspective of what a certain feature means to them. So, try to be very clear with your salesperson as to what kind of features are important to you, and hopefully you get someone good enough to sit with you through the process and help you pick the best car for you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is need versus want versus what you think you want and need. It's a bit of a mouthful. Here's what I mean by that. Now, a lot of the time I get people come into the showroom and they say, I want an SUV because I want more space. And I'll say, hold on a second. Do you want an SUV or do you want more space? There's nothing wrong with either answer, but you want to make sure that you're very honest with yourself. The reason is because a lot of people come in and say, I want an SUV, whether or not they think it has more space because they think that that's the way to justify an SUV purchase. Listen, there's nothing wrong with wanting an SUV for the reason for it being an SUV. However, there are a couple of things you need to know about SUVs. Number one, fuel economy is obviously a very major part of that decision. With the price of fuel these days, SUVs do pose a bit of a problem that way because they do consume more fuel, generally speaking. The reason is that there's two major components to fuel economy, and one of them is not engine size. The two major components to fuel economy are wind resistance and weight. Let's talk about wind resistance first. SUVs and crossovers are generally higher off the ground. They punch a bigger hole in the wind, which means that there's more resistance and the engine has to work harder to push that vehicle through the wind. That's number one. Number two, weight. Because SUVs are usually more complicated, let's say with all-wheel drive systems and the like, they're usually heavier. If a vehicle is heavier, it's just going to consume more fuel. The engine has to work harder. An engine consumes the most fuel when it's under load. It has less to do with engine speed, so like your RPMs, for example, and more to do with the load of the engine, how hard it's working to actually move that vehicle. So that's one thing that's very important to consider. The next thing to consider about SUV is that it's not, because of its extra weight, generally speaking, it's going to be harder on other components like tires and brakes. It's going to go through brakes and tires faster than that of a car. You've got more weight, more strain on those systems. So overall, an SUV will generally cost you significantly more money than a car will because of its weight, its fuel economy, and all that other stuff. So that's one thing to consider. Take that into consideration. Now, the other thing is that sometimes people say, I need a 7-passenger vehicle because my parents come in from out of town. I need to be able to take them around with the kids, etc. Now, I get it. Kids come with a lot of stuff, especially if you've got grandparents and stuff like that that want to come along for the ride. But one thing you definitely want to consider is how often you are really going to use those extra seats. The reason I say that is because most of the time, you might sit down and figure out that you may only need that 3 or 4 times a year. What does that mean? That means you can buy a car if that works for you, and you can rent a minivan for those 3 or 4 times a year that you actually need it. You're going to save a lot of money on fuel and maintenance from not buying an SUV or a minivan, and you're going to get a vehicle that's more fun to drive, like a car. That's a huge benefit about a car is more fun to drive. Now, some people talk about the safety aspect of it. Back in 2006, the IIHS raised their crash standards to measure an SUV's bumper coming at the windows of a car. That means that those vehicles that rate as a good rating with the IIHS are designed with that in mind, including the side structures of the vehicle. Of course, Volkswagen vehicles pass this test with flying colors because our structures are so strong. However, you want to make sure that you know what the safety ratings are of the vehicle you're purchasing, because that's obviously a very important thing. Also, collision avoidance. Cars generally handle better. So there is, statistically speaking, I would say, now I'm guessing here, but I would have to say that there is a better chance of you swerving to avoid a collision in a car than most SUVs, primarily because they handle better, generally speaking. Now, that doesn't mean to say that a Corolla handles better than a Tiguan or vice versa. I'm just saying do your homework and make sure you know what it is that you're buying. We talked about in a previous talk about making sure you test your car's handling and brakes, so that comes into play here as well. Anyway, I'm going to cut this short, but I just wanted to, it's not short, it's over 5 minutes. Anyway, I'm gonna stop here, but I just wanted to give you some of that insight. I'm going to have another talk as well about some of the differences and benefits between leasing and financing, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.